Nice. There we go. Quick intro. Today, it's Wednesday. We are on June the 12th in the Catalyst After Town Hall. And today we have here Thorsten and Raphael, Ken, Jeff, Rob, and Martin. And we continue a conversation on Cardano ecosystem agents. A quick question. Who of you was here last week as well, when we first time spoke about Cardano ecosystem agents? I think, Raphael, I saw you on the beginning. Ken was there maybe too? Not sure.
Yeah, I was on the beginning, but I had to go afterwards, so I didn't fully catch up. And I was not right on the beginning. So when I came after the town hall check-in, it had already started.
Nice. Yep.
I was only there at the very end, so I didn't get much of it.
Cool. And Rob says in chat he was here. So we have one who was here, one who was more in the beginning here, and one who was more in the end here. So this is really cool. Nice. But first to start the introduction, I give a quick intro wrap from last session. So what we spoke about was this Cardano ecosystem agent idea, right? And maybe the best idea is to give an example. What came out actually of last session is what would be the extreme example of a Cardano ecosystem agent. And we went with names like K-Z, Matthias Benkoff from Cardano Foundation, for example. People like Patrick Tokler from NMaker, or people like Daniel Reber from IoT Catalyst team, right? So people which are insanely engaged in the ecosystem, which over years already, and which have definitely over average, let's say, commitment to the whole thing, right? Like our hardcore creme de la creme of the ecosystem. And we're thinking, okay, somebody like this, imagine we have people like this actually hired by the treasury. So we can say, hey, they don't have to be contracted to specific entities or companies. How would it look like if we move into more decentralized environment later, where we say, hey, maybe we have this core contributors to the Cardano ecosystem because they are really good in what they are doing, directly funded by the treasury. Then some ideas came up about there should be definitely some sort of a collaborative framework and support for such agents. So if they come together to work on larger projects, for example, there should be some supportive mechanisms and structure for them. Then another thing what came out as well is that there could be levels of agents. So you might not have to be like Kato, for example, Patrick or Danny, like hardcore. Maybe there could be some lower levels of agents as well. So yeah, I think it's interesting to think about this level system in this regard. And a bunch of other stuff. We made a recording of this, and today is mostly to continue this discussion with people already there from last week and new folks as well. The main idea here on the ecosystem agents is to say, we see that we have more and more roles within the Cardano ecosystem, like very easy to engage, for example, as a Catalyst proposal assessor on the very beginning, right? Later, you can become a proposer. Later, you maybe can become an ambassador, or you could join Intersect or Catalyst workgroups, right? All of them a little bit with their own requirements and, let's say, level of depth in the ecosystem as well. And the agents would rather sit on the outer space, so very extreme cases, right? So maybe not a role for newcomers, nothing where you come and say, oh, cool, I engaged 1 week in Cardano and now I'm an agent. Or rather measuring contributions over years in this regard. Yeah. And the whole thing is, what do people here think about the idea? There are no strong ideas in this. All the stuff here is brainstorming, ideations in phase. So very interested to listen to you guys. Thorsten, you have your hand up already.
I do. I think one element which I would like to see in this context is credentials, like something which kind of proves that you have done certain things for a certain period of time. Whatever it is, there are different roles, as you mentioned, but it for sure would help to have credentials in the context of if you want to do something else, that someone doesn't look at you and say, who are you? So we are kind of known to a certain extent in certain areas and unknown in other areas. So we are kind of introducing Intersect now with a number of roles. And the second element on that one, and you kind of alluded to that one already, is depending on the amount of time you can spend, it also depends on kind of like how the time itself you spend is rewarded at the end of the day. If you want to do something full time, unless you're a privateer and more or less living on the funds of interest, you probably have the challenge of I have to kind of like finance my life. So people who can be really good in something also have to find a way of funding. Kudos to Patrick Tobler on this one. Kind of, he seemed to have found the holy grail of that one at the moment by more or less having a very successful project, which gives him then abilities to do stuff which goes beyond what you can do if you don't have the specking at the end of the day. So I think a combination of both will be probably kind of, from my perspective, something which enables kind of unleash the crazy people into the wild and reach out to the people beyond. Yeah, if I say it this way.
Much agree, and I think this makes a lot of sense, especially when it comes to regardless. Maybe we don't want to ask agents themselves to report so much on their stuff, because when we force them to report and say, hey, what have you done, and all this stuff, this is time they are not doing something, right? So I would say to a credential system, it's also a service to the agents, actually. So being effectively able to capture their work and display to the community for them, so they have this proof record. Yeah, I could
Sorry.
go for it. And actually, you
Crazy.
don't have to raise hands. Just
Yeah,
go
well,
for
I
it.
do just more or less for the kind of hygiene of it. Another idea is kind of ISPO individuals. Yeah, kind of get funding by people more or less by delegating funds behind them so that they have a predictable reward for what they're doing.
Hmm.
Yeah. So kind of like, I think this is the biggest challenge right now. There are people which are the brink to say, I more or less make the jump, but they also have to answer the question of, okay, so how do I pay the bill at the end of the month? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I would say does definitely have to provide financial security and predictability, right? So long-term security, which has to be provided in this regard.
And there are some which are more capable than others. Not saying that kind of like the crowd cannot do that also. But I mean, we have this notion of DREPs at the moment within Catalyst and also within Intersect. There is a question kind of coming out, like how much time do you have to spend and what is the reward for that one? But as you mentioned, there are other roles and they're more or less kind of like are also necessary in the community. I mean, Daniel doesn't have to worry about how kind of the end of the month looks like, hopefully, because he is employed by AOG. Yeah. So there are people in the ecosystem, and I'm not talking now necessarily about Catalyst, but about the wider ecosystem, which more or less have funds and who would be able kind of to support certain activities and have a commitment. I mean, Cardano Foundation is doing that by more or less kind of committing to stake pools, and perhaps we can more or less make that a little bit closer and say, hey, these are the roles which more or less kind of had to earn the bread at the end of the day. And there is a commitment from deep pockets kind of to say, hey, these roles could be supported in a way that they kind of give in part of their staking rewards just to make things work. Yeah. Of course, at the end of the day, it's something which helps them also. If this ecosystem in itself succeeds, then whatever funds they have in the ecosystem is kind of like um, increasing in value and it's secured. And I'm pointing now out CF, but I don't necessarily have to point out of CF. There are others. Yeah, it's just more the challenge or the question to the ones who make a dent. And if they are not willing, perhaps kind of we have to crowdfund something to make a dent and find mechanisms to do that. Yeah. So.
Actually, like because last time we loosely spoke about funding from Treasury, so then ideally via proposals, right? Once the IP 694 would be would be live, but we didn't thought yet about or spoke yet about connections to founding entities like CF, for example, right? Because I think there is a valid point, but when we look on Cardano Foundation and say, okay, they have the delegation program, for example, it would mean that the agents, maybe as collective, need a pool. What could be interesting, like it wouldn't make sense if they run the pool like most of the stake pool operators, so 0 to maximum 2% margin. This wouldn't give anything serious, even if the pool would be fully saturated. What could be interesting is to think about the agent pool, which is highly saturated, which with a really high margin. Because from this, I think a fully saturated stake pool on Cardano makes something about 150,000 ADA
Yeah, it's about
each
somewhere around between 15 and 20,000 ADA
per epoch.
if you give it up on 100%. So okay, let's say 20,000 ADA per epoch. So times 6, that's about 120,000, let's say between 100 and 120,000 ADA, which means kind of that translates at this moment in time to about $40,000. Well, do the math yourself. That more or less could in theory pay a certain number of people kind of giving up what they're doing right now and more or less having the assurance they're not going to stand in the rain.
But even then, one pool wouldn't make sense, right? So ideally, you would have multiple pools, and the buy-in from this could be interesting actually to try to sell this to IoT, CF, and Immorgo.
Yeah,
To
and
say,
say,
hey,
you know what, you kind of want to have certain community members in the community getting in there, spin it now a little bit further and more or less put it into DAO-like structure in itself of people who commit themselves and say, okay, I'm a member of this DAO, and as part of that one, I commit myself to give up a certain defined percentage of my life, which is verifiable, kind of to do certain things. I think this is the main struggle everyone kind of has. He has kind of like you have your day-to-day life, you have your certain income, and as soon as you more or less kind of do voluntary work that just has the end to the means, even if it's paid for in itself, it doesn't have the same quality as if you can unleash someone fully in that context or part-time or whatever the personal arrangement is. Yeah, kind of like it could also be that you kind of have a work arrangement that says I have a paid job for 50% of my time, but the other 50% of my time I more or less kind of give it a full blast. Yeah.
no, it's interesting. Definitely taking notes on this. It's a bunch of good stuff. Ah, cool. But and you mentioned on DAO, right? So maybe moving it into a direction of a DAO. Like I think we briefly touched on this last session.
I think the
Um,
main challenge with the DAOs at the moment, and sorry if I say it this way, is yes, there is some work being put out there. I know that you have done that effectively or part of Swarm, but it's not to a level where you could just say that's sustainable enough. There is enough that I more or less can make a living out of that one. Yeah, it's kind of almost like the byproduct. Like you have to find the way how you finance your life, and then you can additionally do some of the other stuff, either voluntarily or kind of getting paid. But realistically, it is if you want to have people who really make a dent, then they are also kind of depending on where they're living, but they're normally not cheap. Yeah. So kind of like someone it's a question of opportunity cost at the end of the day. So what do I give up and do I believe in this? And there might be a certain level of sacrifice, but we have to get out of this voluntary low paid kind of stuff. It has to, if I want to be a top representative of the community, I have to also pay top dollars for it. Top dollars in the sense I have to compete with the market in with a free market in itself. And I think we have some ways and some means to do that. We just have to recognize that there is a necessity for that one, and we have to support it.
Yep. Not much agree. I think definitely one major lack that I see is very often we have some roles and they mature more and more, but there's still the lack of professionalism let's say, allocated to these groups, right? Like this very professional legitimacy within the Cardano community and also to founding entities, right? And it's very often where they see a difference as well, like what is expected versus what is delivered, and how to do this in a professional setup where I say, okay, like
I think there is a second element, which is of I pay per case or per whatever, per activity, and I secure a capability in itself. Whether I fully utilize it at that moment in time or not. I think there is this difference, kind of like it doesn't matter if I'm getting paid $200 for 3 tasks a month. That doesn't give me a living. I cannot jump onto that one.
Yep.
So the point there is it's not about paying someone for what someone is doing. It's more or less the mindset of securing a capability and then utilizing it.
Yes, definitely I agree on this. Very much agree on this. Because I think also to this regard, when we look, for example, on this hardcore examples, like a beautiful thing about this, they are not really good in only one thing. They're really good in multiple things and they wear a lot of different hats, right? So having this very diverse setup, and it's so difficult to, let's say, map such people into task systems. They say, okay, you get X amount for this task and this amount, X amount of this task. You actually kill their creativity and let's say potential in this one. So much
what is the
increase.
value of Daniel, for example? Can you more, if you would have to split his role into payable tasks, you would just kind of overkill administratively, or you wouldn't do him justice in itself because he's wearing, I don't know how many hats per day, just more or less kind of to push the ecosystem forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
On the one hand side, he's a community manager. Then he's kind of like a facilitator of an issue with a funded proposal. He's trying to bring people together. He's giving answers to people who have a dumb question, which is not so dumb because it needs an answer, and so on and so on and so on. So every single task he's doing, and he's probably doing hundreds a day, are all in different categories. And if you want to have to, if you would ask him to track and trace that and put a price tag on each of them, you would just burden that one with an overkill. At the end of the day, he probably would lose interest in this because spending the time on administrative tasks and not on doing what he's good in doing doesn't make it worthwhile at the end of the day. Yeah. So it's kind of like and I mean in the normal environment there is always kind of a pay you a base salary and I pay you something on how good you are element on that one. And I mean that might also be an element which needs to be considered in this context. Like and it's hard. You just measure people when they're not there anymore, what kind of impact they left. Yeah. So
yes.
if a Daniel wouldn't be there anymore, would we miss him? 100%. Did we get a taster of that? Yeah, probably in the one or the other way when he was on 2 weeks of holiday. Then you see how much value these people just present through their presence. Yeah, and I think this is what you're trying to pick up on. People being there, being available, being helpful, doing the groundwork stuff and pushing on the other side the envelope forward by more or less pushing the boundary for the ecosystem. That's kind of like creating then the value for the ecosystem, which goes beyond of what you actually pay them, because if they create real value, the value you create is probably far beyond what you actually have to pay them in whichever way you pay them at the end of the day. And I'm shutting up now because there are other people on the call. I would like to hear what they think about it.
But dude, that's pure gold. What is coming out of your brain and mouth? That really, like, I will clip this out later and do it for later. When it comes like, here, this is the intro on ecosystem agents by Thorsten, and this is pretty awesome on the point. But yeah, what do other folks think?
I really like the discussion, so you guys should have continued. But yeah, I think that's one of the problems. How are you going to measure contributions and also like the difference value in terms of the contribution, right? Because for me, maybe Catalyst is super important and I like Daniel's work, but for someone else, Catalyst shouldn't exist. So up to what point, the value of a contribution is real or not, it's a bit subjective, so that's hard to measure, right? It depends kind of who you're reporting to. So yeah, I don't know what you think about that.
I can give you kind of our point of view from DLT 360 on that one and our spin on that one. A lot of people, kind of analysts, however they call them, kind of look at Cardano and say, oh, that's a ghost chain. There's not really anything going on. I think a wrong stronghold which we have is that we have a really strong community compared to other ecosystems. They're really struggling on having that. And we have to really recognize that. And Daniel is doing a great job as a community manager, kind of to push things forward, give an answer to questions, more or less facilitate things, try to smooth things out, pointing people in the right direction, whatever. But there is this notion which came effectively out of the workshops, which were, from my perspective, twofold. On the one hand side is we have to do more marketing. We have to show the world better what we're actually good at. And the second thing is we have to do real world applications. We demonstrate that kind of like we're not just talking about theoretical stuff which in the space of blockchain or crypto or whatever, but which is actually creating the use case to the world. And I think the way that was expressed by Charles and also effectively by Cardano Foundation is adoption of real world applications where the user in itself doesn't even know which blockchain they are using, but it actually what it does is it creates a transaction volume in the background. It more or less makes this ecosystem valuable because it more or less gets load, and we have the right technology kind of to provide all of that. This is not coming easy. Yeah, we as DLT 360 have been kind of drumming the beat on that side for a while. And man, this is hard work to convince the real world that they should use applications or even think about applications, and then effectively kind of closing the gap between the technology which we have on our hands, so stuff which we are building, and whether that is really solving a problem which the world has and acknowledge and where they jump onto. So the holy grail on that side also is kind of like we have to reach out and learn beyond the technical environment which we have been in the past, and kind of now to connect the technology capabilities to the adoption by whomever. And I honestly don't care whether it's kind of like on the consumer side, or we are playing more in the area of business and industry, but you need these people to connect, and you have to be able kind of like to run it doesn't help if you run a marathon and after effectively 19 kilometers you're running out of fuel, meaning kind of you have to stop because you don't have the funds kind of to reach the ultimate goal. No one knows exactly how long this race actually is, but we need people kind of to connect use cases with the technology which we're having right now, and that goes beyond the pure community element. It also is a service to the community in the sense of saying what you're trying to solve here is a problem or no, it's not a problem. And you have to talk to the people who at the end of the day would adopt this solution or don't adopt this solution. And there are some interesting great leeways, and there is a lot of space in this context. So that comes a little bit also into this context of outreach and marketing, and you need people who are kind of like evangelizing what you're doing and what people are doing in this ecosystem effectively to connect it to the world outside. Yeah, so we have to leave a little bit this echo chamber, and to do that, you need to have some funding in the background, because otherwise it is becoming effectively very voluntary activity, and it's almost every single round we as DLT 360, I'm just talking about us at the moment, are struggling, kind of hoping that we get funded at least with one or two projects so to keep this journey going. But if that's not the case, with the best intent, we will have to kind of then brace for impact and more or less kind of scale down. And I think we are also, as a Cardano blockchain, in the competition with others. So it's well said that we have a lot of money in the treasury, but the question at the end of the day is, where do we spend it on, and does it create the impact which we should create? That's the reason why I'm saying, for example, people who have deep pockets, perhaps they can share a little bit of their interest by more or less kind of enabling certain capabilities. And if it doesn't work out, okay, fair enough. Yeah, more or less can always be time framed, but give security to people for a certain period of time that they can do the job without worrying about the bill at the end of the month. And I shut up now again.
I think that
Go ahead, Ken.
okay. I think that looking at it more from a community perspective, like if you're trying to manage looking at what everybody's contributing and then figuring out how to distribute funds from a centralized perspective to people who are doing things in the community, that would be a lot harder than as an individual to see who's been helpful to you. So like if you've got someone who's helpful to a lot of different people in the community, then having some way of letting each individual person um, say who's been helpful to them, and then seeing what the tally is, or like maybe someone you can have like a process or automated way to chain donations together. So it might not be the full extent of how people get funding, but if you want to incentivize people to do more for the community, like maybe you have like a function that allows you to keep a certain amount, because people have different living situations and they require different amounts of funds depending on where they live or what they contribute. And so maybe there's a certain level at which you're willing to donate maybe 50% of what you receive on top of that to different things that have contributed to what you're doing. And so if you add all those things together, I think the people who do most in the community would end up receiving rewards that reflect that.
Yeah, I think the main challenge I can see is that we have to clearly differentiate kind of like compensating for voluntary, not, let's not call it voluntary, but kind of in the space of community work. And on the other side, getting someone in to do the job professionally. Let me give you an example and it becomes clear. We all have been moaning about IdeaScale. We hate this tool because it doesn't do what it should do. So now we're kind of funding the IoG team to create Catalyst voices, and they're making effectively progress. But the only reason why the progress and the achievement can be done is because there is money behind that. They don't have to worry about it. They have a certain budget. They know what is committed to them. They can deliver great stuff. And they're delivering great stuff when you look at the milestone module and how we more or less matured when it comes to the management of funds. This is depending on the fact that there was someone who said, you know what, don't worry, we're going to pay you. You have this job to develop something. Please deliver this. And once you deliver this, it's gonna work. The mechanism, and Felix is kind of like perhaps a victim of that one, of going back to the community every 4 months to ask for the next round of money is just kind of dreadful. Yeah. Catalyst voices changed that a little bit because they asked for, please fund us for 12 months. We're going to deliver this one for 12 months. And that gives peace in mind for a period of time, which is more reasonable than kind of like, oh yeah, you get funded for the next 4 weeks, 8 weeks, depending on something else. So we have to start thinking about also what we need as an ecosystem from a community perspective, but also from an outreach perspective to make it worthwhile for people kind of to take the risk to say, yeah, I'm going to jump into that. And the time span of a funding round in itself for enabling this on an ongoing basis of like a window of 4 weeks or so, 4 months, it's not worthwhile. And then on the other side, you have then let's face it, the IoG team asked for probably the biggest chunk of funding ever compared to everyone else. and there is an expectation that they deliver great things, and so far they're doing a good job and demonstrating that they can deliver on that. But it also means don't do this in little tiny bits and pieces which are not even secured. You have to put a certain amount of money behind a certain idea to make it work.
And also the strategy, right? I mean, Catalyst
Yeah,
was able to do it because they created their own category
I
already
get
for
it.
it, right?
I get it. And
sort
and
of
we can
weird.
all have a conversation about that one. But at the end of the day, what it shows is if you put effectively, let's say, I don't know how much it was. I don't even know it in detail. Kind of several million ADA behind certain things.
Yeah,
You
8
can
million
achieve
in a
great things.
challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
8
And
million in a
then by a
challenge with
sudden,
4 million. And you
yeah,
ask yourself, wait, how is this possible? But
yeah.
what?
But I mean, ignoring that for a minute, what it actually demonstrates is if it's a worthwhile course and everyone agrees on that one, you have to commit bigger chunks of money than effectively 100,000 ADA. It's just dreadful. Yeah, it's just kind of like treading water at that moment in time with this amount of money. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I understand that. Like I don't know where I'm going to get my next rent from. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So
I'm in the same
and
boat.
yeah, and that I mean you cannot ask someone to more or less giving his livelihood up in a certain way and on the other side not providing the security that it's worthwhile, at least for a period of time. Everyone has a certain entrepreneurial
Yeah,
spirit. And to be very honest, I mean, I look at the guys from the IAG team and says, okay, you have a certain backing, which might help you going forward. But there is a certain jumping into the water also, but they didn't jump into the water, which was just 3 months long. It was effectively a 12 months period with a reasonable assumption that it will go beyond. And then you by a sudden unleash power beyond your imagination. Yeah. By a
yeah.
sudden you get
Like
stuff done.
I agree with you. I like what I was talking about wasn't necessarily something to replace it, but something to go with a more stable thing. Like if you have a way to incentivize community engagement. So like if a project is going
But
off to do things by themselves without like I don't know, it would be more geared
and
towards
I think I
open
think I
source
think we
and
have to differentiate now two things. On the one hand side, to incentivize community engagement in an appropriate way. That's one thought of thinking. And the other one to unleash the ones more or less kind of can reach the moon. Yeah. So kind of can really push things forward. I think the second is the group which kind of I understand we are talking about right now, which actually means kind of like how do you unleash someone to change effectively the way things are?
well, how do you know that they're changing the way things
You
are?
don't. You never do.
See,
You never.
in the
That's
regard to agents, you do because they wouldn't be a newcomer role, right? So we speak about people which ideally we track since years in the ecosystem, and where pretty much the largest part of the community knows already. Yeah, the people like this, they define the standard of what we say, maybe what we call community engagement. Maybe
Yeah.
like somebody like yeah, Danny, Matthias, or Patrick. Like actually, I don't think that there needs to be some validation or even standardization on community engagements or requirements because the only thing what we want to do is expect and ensure that they just do what they did so far and just do it.
Yeah.
And in this regard, also maybe having full agency so that they are not narrowed by any KPIs, OKRs, or specific projects. It should be in their individual power to decide where do they want to work, in which specific project, at which time or area, for example. So really give them
I'm,
full control of the action
I'm,
actually.
I'm,
And
I mean, obviously,
the overall operation altogether is what I would define as community engagement actually.
yeah. So there are people which I can identify which kind of do a great effort in certain areas and they put themselves behind that. And they put themselves behind that with or without funding, but it would be so much easier if they wouldn't have to look at the funding side of things all the time. Yeah. So, and I mean, I probably can come up with a list, and other people can come up with a list, and the list would be somewhat identical, and then somewhat it would be different. But at the end of the day, I think with the intent behind
Basic,
that, we would recognize kind of like we would come up with probably an 80% similar list.
well,
If
that's what I was saying. That's the whole thing I was talking about. If you aggregate everybody's, like if someone, if you put, if each person involved has a little bit of skin in the game as far as pointing out who's been helpful to them, and then you do the aggregation of all the different things, then you get a clear picture of who contributes to the to helping the most people, basically.
yeah, but my point, Ken, was kind of like we have to have two perspectives on that one. One
Yeah,
perspective is
I agree with I
who is
agree.
helping, who is the inside viewer, kind of like who is helping the ones which are inside at this moment in time most. And then there is this other view is who is reaching out to the untouched the most. Yeah. So kind of like I admire Patrick Tobler, for example, for his ambition to say, M maker. It's okay, the project which he's running, but by doing that, he becomes an ambassador, is going to be the number one NFT minting provider in Japan. That has a huge impact because he is touching community in Japan and has a stronghold of ADA holdership in Japan. So whatever he does, whatever he touches, hopefully it will turn into gold. Yeah. And if he's making money out of that one, great. Bless him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't care. He's now kind of joining forces with a Mergor, and that is just accelerating what he's doing anyhow. This is what Felix is talking about. There are others who are doing similar things. Everyone might have a personal top 10 list, but if we would all have our personal top 10 list and bring that together, we would come down to a short list of people where we say we want them to do what they're doing no matter what, and we want to make sure that they don't have to worry about the funding to do what they're doing. Yeah. So let me give you another example. Hosky. Yeah. Fucking hell. This guy is actually using mem to spread the name of Cardano in a great way. And I don't know what his personal or what the team's personal situation is in itself, but my point of view is there are certain things where we shouldn't kind of like hold back because of not unleashing funds which are available in the treasury. And we have to find ways how to do that. Because these people are gold dust. And once you lose them in your ecosystem, you actually will see the void which they are leaving in this context. And we cannot afford as an ecosystem to do that.
Yeah.
And you can disagree with me whether Hosky is worthwhile or not. They are happy kind of like to have this disagreement with me. But what I'm trying to say is there are people which are essential kind of to push things forward, and we have to kind of give them all the support from a community perspective we can, and we have to make the tough calls to the people which can actually do that. And it's either the many or it's a few, doesn't really matter. But we have to kind of start thinking about how do we become out of the community strength which we have as an ecosystem effectively the invincible community which is pushing the agenda forward against the other chains around us. Yeah, so I don't want to slash here anyone, but I look at Solana at the moment a lot, and all I see in Solana is it's getting pumped very heavily through memes. Yeah, and it's kind of like a fast track make quick money scheme that has no sustainability. But actually, if you look at the market value, they are more valuable than Cardano. And I look at it and say, okay, so what do we have to do kind of to catch up on that one? Yeah. What do we have to do to push market value? What do we have to do to push recognition? And at the end of the day, there will always be someone on the outside who says, oh yeah, these guys kind of have these weird ideas. But as Charles says, we are here effectively to change the world. So the question then is, which people more or less help us most, and how do we support them as a community?
I don't know, maybe just to put it out there, maybe the source of where we perceive the value of the different blockchains is not totally the
To be
best.
to be honest, I don't care about other chains at the end of the day. I'm fully invested in ADA, and I want to make sure that this community, this chain in itself succeeds. Yeah. So
That's
I'm,
that,
but
that's actually an interesting point because I'm on the extreme opposite side here. Because I'm
okay.
generally blockchain maximalist, I don't think that Cardano will be the chain which overcomes everything, because this wouldn't be the idea of blockchain in general. I think the future of blockchain is really multi-chain and cross-chain applications and processes where you have an app and the app is using this part on this blockchain because this blockchain is insanely good and very specifically this, let's say security. Another one because it's insanely good into microtransaction. Another one because it's insanely good in this. And we see this emerging already more and more, right? That we have common architectures,
and
common
and
blueprints where whole
happy
ecosystems build on
and
this.
happy to battle that with you. It's
But
probably a little bit monolithic at the moment, and the main reason why I'm saying that is um, this interoperability is really hard at this moment in time. Perhaps that's one of the things where someone more or less kind of is one of the people which kind of like break down the barriers which we're talking about. This is where it goes to the outside more than to the inside, where we say, okay, so how do we more or less bring interoperability with Polkadot, Cosmos, whatever, yeah, Ergo into play so that the ecosystems of these chains in itself become successful, and the ecosystem in itself is something which more or less kind of outcompetes than the monolithic chain in itself. I get you, Felix. I'm just yet not there because for me it's still I get it, and I admire you for unifiers in this context. It's just like on a technical side, it's still a little bit too hard. There are still too many barriers and they have to be broken down. So from that side, I admire your work. I'm just not yet there that I say I have the bandwidth and capacity in my mind and the time to kind of like deal with three different philosophical approaches and to identify what is the best out of everything. Yeah, kind of like again, that's one area where I would say if there is someone who is passionate about it and wants to crack the nut, happy to support them from my side. Would be even happier if the community gets behind it or whoever kind of has the money gets behind it and says it's not just about us, it's about building an ecosystem which kind of is invincible to whatever. Invincible in the sense of it just gets the best out of it and still acknowledges the spirit of decentralization and the resilience which comes with that.
mm, because on this actually a question coming up as well, because you mentioned several terms like business development and for example stuff. How do you see the agents in this regard, guys? And are they grouped in areas? Like for example, usually war groups or let's say ambassador programs work, right? You have specific areas or groups, or should there be rather no
I,
sets?
well, I have a view. So we are still struggling with having the right resources available to actually make things real from a technology perspective, but also to bridge effectively the gap between technology and application. Of course, there is still quite a gap. There is a knowledge element to it. There is also an element to it to understand the problem I try to solve. Yeah. So the technology side is one thing. I have to have the capability to solve the problem with the technology I have on hand. But on the other side, I have to also understand the problem in the first place. If I solve with the right technology the wrong problem, I still don't solve something which is creating value in itself.
This
And
was
then
nice said.
yeah, and then the next layer on top of that one is, okay, now we're talking about interoperability and what is the best chain for which kind of problem, which is another layer of complexity. I think we are struggling as an ecosystem at this moment in time to really understand in some cases the problems and to provide the right solution for the problem. So we are spending a lot of energy on the technology side, bless us. But on the other side, we're not spending enough time to understand the real problem space which we're trying to solve. And I'm looking at it from a business and industry perspective. We are eating our own dog poo in this moment in time. So we have a proposal which we got funded, which we did a concept. And when we talk to the business, not hundreds of people, we talked to a few people, and we're shut up not by what the idea is. They thought, okay, the idea might be okay, but the way you're trying to connect that to the problem you perceive is not understood by the people you're talking to. And then you more or less become very humble and say, oh shit, we didn't do our problem and solution analysis properly. And it's not about developing something from a technology stack perspective. It's kind of like we probably didn't catch the problem which we perceive properly. So we have to do a number of iterations. And we have to also acknowledge that blockchain is not just about technology. It's about, if I want to solve real world problems, I have to understand what the problems of the real world are. And sometimes our perception might be clouded a little bit by where you're coming from. And you have to kind of face the harsh, very cold reality of the world out there, whether they perceive the problem in the same way. And if they don't, it doesn't matter whether you have the best technology in the world, you still fail. Yeah. So there is a learning curve for us, probably also as an ecosystem, to understand what the heck are we trying to achieve here, and is what we are thinking actually, I wouldn't say mainstream, but actually for the target group which we're trying to address, the real problem. And so far, if you look at the solutions which we are having in our ecosystem, we have a little bit of DeFi, others have a little bit of more. And what else? Yeah. So if I'm dreaming of millions and millions of users and millions of transactions on the chain, I have to be the painkiller for the pains of the people. Then they will come and adopt. If I try to kind of sell placebos to people who are not really feeling the pain, you cannot sell a painkiller to someone who doesn't have the pain. It's mission impossible. It's like selling ice lollies to Eskimos. Yeah. And we have to really get better on that side. And that's where the outreach element becomes so tremendously important. From a technology stack perspective, we are almost getting there now. There are a few things which we still might have to solve. And I don't want to stop these people, but there is this other side of the things, which is, do we really understand the problems which we're trying to solve with the technology which we have on hand? And that will be the
Especially
make or break. That will be the make or break element for whatever chain. Doesn't really matter whether it's Cardano or anything else. And interoperability in itself also kind of is still living under the same umbrella of what is the use case. Yeah.
Yep. And much agreed, definitely tricky, and also the global aspect, right? Let's say education. You go for American project, education, they come up with a earn to learn. You go education to Africa, they will bring fucking 400 students together in the school and teach them about technology. Like very different, right? In this regard.
And it's all well and good. The point is, what is the expectation coming out of this at the end of the day? We did have a very painful experience as DLT, which was we were putting hours and hours and hours into really good PowerPoint presentations and try to reach business and industry. And I said, you know what? Might be interesting, but not at this moment in time. We have other headaches. Yeah. So it's really hard to to find the pain endocrine painkiller and find the right momentum to bring this together.
Jin, what would be some best examples we have in the past where we can say, oh, community members really did a thing here? I think I would say right now, Latam community, definitely everything what they are doing there over there is just insane. Especially to see, hey, the Latam community is really young. They emerged through Qatar this kind of 2.5 years ago, right? It started with the Sala de Cafe, still live here actually. This was the beginning of Latam community, right? And then folks like Mauro,
but I mean,
Alex, Lucas jumped
with
in.
without any prejudice, kind of like if your economy in itself is pretty shit, you have to start to become creative to get out of the mud. So
But
if you
but
look,
But that's
yeah,
the
so
thing, right? I mean, for the problem, what is the problem? As European or United or in the United States, or let's say in the Western world, I still can go with 5 or 6 bank accounts. I don't have a problem, right? I don't really need crypto. Now we go in geographical areas where they feel the pain, actually, right? I think therefore to see what is happening in Africa and in Latam, this is insane. The work which is
well,
done there
if you have an
because they
inflation
bring
of
the
50% and
Mm.
their fiat money in itself kind of is trembles faster than you can even count the money, by a sudden you say, yeah, I'm happy to take crypto because at the end of the day, I don't have the same crazy inflation rates on that side and create a little bit of stability for my life if I'm getting paid in Bitcoin or Ether or Aether or whatever. Just throw at me anything which has a certain level of stability because it's better than what I experience in my ecosystem right now. If you're in
Yeah.
a different environment, like in the US, you think the dollar is still strong, it's getting at the moment even stronger. You don't have that pain. So crypto doesn't solve that pain for you because you don't have it. So in that case, coming with this, oh yeah, but this is an alternative to the trembling fiat system, yep, the guy in Argentina understands you a lot better in this context than the guy in the US because for them the pain is yet not felt. That
And
might change over time, and it's a discussion which more or less has a mid and long term. But if you want to have adoption now, you have to go to where the pain is if you're selling painkillers. Yeah.
I was actually thinking of when it
Not
comes to adoption.
100%. Oh, I was just gonna say I'm not 100% sure if people aren't feeling the pain in the US, but like
I'm
yeah,
I'm I'm
here in
I'm
Africa it's better than
yeah,
or it's
but
more that you can feel than back there,
okay. I
but
get
there's a lot of people feeling the pain there too.
I get you, and I think
Okay,
kind
fair.
of like this is this is coming along stronger, probably over time, more or less, depending where you are. But I can tell you, if I have a 50% inflation rate and I'm more or less depending on the Argentinian pesos to be paid at the end of the month, the time I spend at the beginning of the month is just half the amount worth at the end of the month. You say, well, don't pay me in this kind of currency, pay me in something different. So the willingness of adoption in that context is a lot higher. And there is an opportunity. I mean, at the end of the day, it's kind of like don't try to solve the hard problems, try to solve the low-hanging fruits in itself, but be clear about that. And I think where we have to start to become more intelligent jointly as a community, knowledge is to find the use cases where adoption can be rapid, where we solve a real problem now, not a problem which kind of like, yeah, we feel it ish kind of, but at the end of the day, I'm still want to be paid at the end of the month in US dollars. If you understand what I mean, kind of like,
Yeah, well
yeah,
that's similar to what's going on here in Malawi. So
yeah,
like the value of the kwacha goes down faster than the value of the dollar has been going down, even though it has. Like I I I don't know. I think if there was a way to come up with something that was more stable than the dollar, that would improve adoption much better than anything else I can think of. Like
yeah,
if you have something that's more stable than what people are already using, and they can see that its value is better compared to the dollar, then they'll see it as something that's better than what they already want.
But Guys, I love the conversation, but would love to bring it back to the ecosystem agent thing, because here we speak a little bit, I
Yeah,
think, about financial and economic developed general.
I get it, but this is
What,
actually the point, Felix. If we have people who are able, kind of, for example, to pick up the problems and kind of like
exactly
drive
just
them.
because I have a question on this then, because when we say, okay, when we say adoption and we say, okay, this is important anyway, without going into financial philosophy or
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
just say, okay, who is currently in charge of it? I mean, we have Cardano Foundation, who is pretty much in charge of Cardano mission vision, partnerships, awareness, and stuff. Then we have Immorgo, more on the business development branch. But besides them, which capacity do we currently have in the ecosystem on that?
Let me put it this way. I mean, I see things which impresses me more and which impresses me less, kind of by these two um, stakeholders in the ecosystem, and then you can also talk about IoG in itself. But the point there is
I
that
choose core development of Cardano more, right? It's
yeah,
not that much
I get
awareness and
I get
feel
I get it. I get it. But the point is they cannot do it on themselves. Yeah. And I think depending on when you look at that, they had a more or less good record on certain things. So kind of like the diversity of experience and knowledge which comes into that one goes probably beyond the number of people which are kind of engaged in these organizations directly. And we have to start to learn to listen to each other and learn from each other in a better way than we did that in the past. And it was almost like, oh, I do this and you do this, kind of like, what the heck, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Probably you have to kind of put this line in the sand so that you don't step on each other's toes all the time. But if there is enough work to be done, that risk is actually fading away. So at the end of the day, do I touch the right things and do I get enough people behind it to solve then the problem which more or less kind of gets identified? And I think we still see that they're getting a little bit better, but not. They could be miles better if they use effectively community in a better way. Let me put it this way. Yeah. So like
because that's interesting, right? Because there the agents now could actually become a solution, because we could say, okay, with the agents, we don't have to go to replace already existing capacities, but ideally improve and add to already existing capacities,
complement,
right?
let's call it
And
complement, and
to,
unleash the people to complement effectively to be effective.
yeah,
That would be
because the agents in this regard would be highly professionalized community members without, let's say, NDAs and stuff through a direct company. And by stake, they have already quite good relations, right? So this is actually another thing how we can define an agent as well, has very strong relations. Because when agents come and they say, oh, now I want to help Cardano Foundation, but I don't know anybody there. That's already a bad sign. You are here for years. You should know the people at Cardano Foundation at least a little bit. And as there is no authority, there's no way to initiate those relations for you, right? You have to bring those relations already in. And
but
then the agent is in a very strong position actually to now effectively coordinate with the communities, right?
and I mean you have been kind of in the midst of that one, let's put it this way, kind of when we kind of were putting some stuff into Ledger, then you were kind of playing a role in the middle. Yeah. So there were two parties, the one who had the capability, the other one who had the demand. And we more or less kind of made it happen that certain capabilities by a sudden is available in a certain ecosystem environment. In that case, effectively, the Ledger people. And I mean, this is where this connecting capability itself becomes extremely valuable. And there could be a number of different connections which kind of infuse the ecosystem in itself. Yeah. So
But
as I
this
said,
actually, I really like this part already of to say, okay, the agent's network itself should act as complement to already existing resources and capacities, and maybe even ideally improve already existing resources, right?
uh, on that side, or more or less extend capability. I mean, this is also the other thing. Yeah, kind of like how many people does the Cardano Foundation have? I don't know, 120, 150, something around that. how many cases can they chew actually, and at which moment in time they have to kind of realistically say, well, actually, we need more. Yeah. So, and how do you create more? And again, in that case, you don't want to work with the person who's doing that kind of like on a semi-professional way on the sideline in the 5 minute spare each day, but you want to have someone who can full-time kind of commit themselves to that one, and you have to enable that. Yeah, I mean, in the commercial world, this is kind of like this idea of freelancers. Yeah, they don't belong to you, but you more or less use them to achieve certain things, and you select them because they have certain capabilities which they either acquired or which you more or less help them to acquire, and then by a sudden they become valuable in a certain context. We should just become smarter as an ecosystem, kind of to utilize the human resource which we have in the ecosystem.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Much
There shouldn't
sentence.
there shouldn't be a single person who has a capability who gets unused in the system for growth. That is just waste of resources.
Agree, but there you speak about a highly efficient system, like wasting no resources as well.
I
This
I
is
I
hard.
I get it, and there will be failure, but at the end of the day, sometimes you have to kind of change the viewpoint and do things differently to kind of empower people. There will be a certain level of misuse, as always, but then there is
Yes.
on the other side this level of additional gain, which more or less outweighs the risk which you take. Yeah.
Because actually on the thing, what happens if an agent goes funny and starts to do weird stuff? Because on one side we say we want to provide long-term financial security. So ideally there's some sort of maybe a small contract to the treasury, right? But now we see, oh, okay, person was somehow approved, elected, I mean, whatever. Now it's an action and now starts to do really weird stuff here. How do
I
we
mean,
stop such a thing then actually?
no, I think we have to kind of take a little bit of a different approach mentally on that one. If you do innovation, for example, you kind of spread your bets. You don't know what's going to work. Every single bet, you put on not with intent to lose money. You kind of try to optimize every single opportunity and you evaluate that. But what you do is you reevaluate that again and again and again and say, okay, is it kind of leading anywhere? And at the end of the day, have a funnel which breaks out into kind of now this is something where you harvest it on. Would I spend still kind of on 100 different people to figure out which 10 are actually making a dent? Yes, because there is no other way than kind of taking the risk at the end of the day and pushing things forward. Yeah, I think there is a generic element of if there is a misuse, we will detect it and we will stop it in the same way as you stop an innovation project which never will make it. You reevaluate it at a certain moment in time and say, listen, this is not going to fly. I would be a bit more courageous in the context of human resources and say, that might not have been your thing. Perhaps you have to rethink, give it another try. And if you come up with another way kind of to add value to this ecosystem, be my guest, but you start at the bottom of this selection process again. Yeah. And that way you might have some people who kind of play that system and eat, but if 2 people out of 100 or 10 people out of the 100 eat and 90 have an ambition and I create 20 who make a difference for the ecosystem out of that one, I probably can tolerate the 10 at the end of the day and I have to just use the mechanisms of the selection process kind of to deal with the issue.
And
Yeah.
also when thinking about that, we would have maybe levels, right? So
Yeah.
we have
Yeah.
to say, oh, okay,
And
maybe newcomer, let's say you're 3 years in the ecosystem. You start at a relative low level. You are since 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. So really this long term and actually then to say, oh, okay, main goal is to say full-time, lifetime.
exactly.
Because
I mean,
we can't compensate some of these, let's say somebody who's 10 years in the ecosystem leaving now because of financial issues. The fuck no. We are not rich enough to waste that
yeah.
resources, right?
And
And when we say then we would have levels and earlier engagements, they have, let's say, you could also say salaries are like in tiers, for example. Level 1 doesn't get the same like level 7 or level 15, for example. And we, as less salaries are to lower levels, we don't have a lot of risk neither, right? We have a risk when it comes to the higher levels and higher salaries, but from these guys, we mitigate the risk because we calculate in more and more years, right?
I think there is another element to that one, and I look at it from my perspective at the moment. I'm probably the expert in the area, what I'm doing. Am I the best person for the operational day-to-day grinding? No, waste of money and time and effort. My expertise in itself and my value lies more in the knowledge and ability kind of to push certain things forward, to see certain things. And the same way, it probably works also in effectively ecosystems like a blockchain. Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's not so much like you're doing over your lifetime, you're doing different things. Felix, I think you more or less have done a lot of shit. Some of the stuff which you did kind of like 5 years ago, you wouldn't do today anymore because you by now learned your bit and you know now that it's more valuable kind of to train up other people to do this stuff than doing it yourself. Yeah. So we have to also kind of acknowledge that people in itself evolve over time, and the value they provide for an ecosystem is changing due to the fact that they have certain experience and knowledge and certain connections and a network, and that in itself is valuable in an own rights and means. Does it mean that the person who is doing the grinding job should worry about the day-to-day living compared to the person who is kind of like creating value by having connections? No. Does it mean that you want to compensate that in different ways? I don't know. Yeah, so that's a philosophy question at the end of the day. But what we have to recognize is that the knowledge which we are building in the ecosystem, and you told me once, wait 10 years, and the knowledge which we are gaining today will be highly valuable in 10 years because we do some shit which other people never even think about yet. We have to acknowledge that this is happening and that we have to keep these resources in the ecosystem. They cannot just take the knowledge and go somewhere else, because then we are losing. Doesn't matter whether we're talking one chain or ecosystem of chains, well, however that pans out at the end of the day. But if someone is good and understandable in a certain area and kind of really pushes some topics forward, shouldn't be lost to this ecosystem in itself, but just because we didn't make funds which we had available to these people to stay. That's kind of where it goes wrong. And that's kind of, I think, the edge which you're looking at this moment in time. People which are so valuable that you want to make sure that they never go.
Yep, definitely. And I really like your perspective. So because this is true, people change and so do their contributions. And I hope that Danny is not filling out anymore fucking shitload of Google Sheets to manage Catalyst, right? As he did, for example, 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Like,
And at the end
and
of
I
the day,
hope
he should be at a point now where he shouldn't even have to deal with Google Sheets at the end of the day, because
Yep.
someone else should be able to do that. But this is what we have to recognize, what we have to empower people, because we provide means to unleash them to do what they're actually best at. Yeah. Then he's probably good in Google Sheets, but that's not his core competency. He should do something else full time, and someone else should take care of that. And that way, we have also a system which kind of like gives opportunities for everyone, even for the people which are coming in newly, because they have all skill sets and experience, and perhaps kind of they can do this stuff, which kind of unleashes someone else to do more. And that in itself, this unlocking in itself is a valuable contribution to the ecosystem as such. Yeah. If a Patrick Tobler doesn't have to worry about this or that anymore because someone else can worry about that, happy days. Yeah. Patrick, be my guest. Do more of what you're actually kind of like, where you're pushing the boundary in itself.
I like this because this brings a really nice human perspective to it, right? Because in this regard, what we want to incentivize is not only the presence and continuity of the agent, but also its individual development. Let's say, become better. Whatever you do, become better. And this is very much a choice of the ambassador, of the agent, but I think there should definitely be some sort of incentive then to this. Could be in the framework itself that it say, hey, we are not only looking to support you financially on your full-time engagement, Cardano. We also want to provide you framework where you'll not rely to anybody or whatnot. Become better on what you do. Do what you like and do it really, really good. And hopefully it's in service to the ecosystem.
I mean, there's
Like,
a virtual commitment effectively kind of to the roots in this context, like don't misuse the system, but use the system to kind of excel. That's, I
mhm.
think, kind of framing it a little bit. Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's on the individual kind of to identify the areas where acceleration is possible and would contribute to the value of the ecosystem as such. But there is also this element of the community as such to control that this is not used in a way where it kind of leads to, you know what, I'm just gonna more or less have pina coladas and watching the waves come to shore because someone else is more or less funding my lifestyle. And if we find a solution to that one, and probably it's probably as hard as kind of getting governance right. But if we get this right, that will revolutionize effectively the way kind of this ecosystem will evolve, and it will create precedents, as I think governance will create precedents through decentralized blockchain for the world. That also would create precedents for the world in a way that they say, "Wow, this is better," yeah, and therefore it becomes desirable.
Hmm. Much agree on this. Actually, I will post a link in the live chat here because this is something actually really interesting for folks here to read through. This is from something I learned about Polkadot, which is called the Fellowship program. The Fellowship program is yeah, pretty much very, very similar to what we discuss here. And the whole thing there is that it takes 17 years to achieve the highest rank. And it's what I call collectives. So you have the specific groups around specific topics, but so more strict in this regard. And right now they have, for example, the Technical Fellowship program. The Technical Fellowship is a group around, I think, a little bit more than 70 people right now, which are working full-time on core development of Polkadot. What is actually interesting because in their regard, Web3 Foundation Parity, which are like IOG and Cardano Foundation in our context, they became very much obsolete already in their governance, right? So Polkadot is a little bit more advanced on the development on governance in this regard. And they said then, oh, okay, so but ideally we want to have this full-time contributors to the thing, but not from a specific entity in this regard, right? So we have this collective, it's what I call. And wait, need to find the link.
The interesting thing is I'm living in the UK. I'm living close to a town which is called Winchester, and Winchester is the research headquarter of IBM in the UK. And they have something like fellows, and these guys kind of all they do is they turn up to work pretty much, and they do whatever they want to do. Some of the outcomes, some of the great outcomes in this context is IBM developed effectively the first concept of a hard drive. Think about it, like what,
I mean,
how revolutionary. Yeah,
IBM, they're old as shit, like they're 200 years already or something like this.
I
IBM
get
is
it. I get it. I get it.
They
I
know
get it.
stuff,
I
yeah.
get it. So I'm not, I don't want to advocate IBM as a company in itself, but kind of the underpinning philosophy in this context of a fellowship. And you know what? Do whatever you want to do, think and research on or push things forward. In that case, it's research. And they are kind of doing some cool shit. The first time I heard about zero knowledge proofs, didn't even have the name. It's probably 15 years ago in a hush conversation with these guys in Winchester from IBM and the company I'm working for. And I said, you know, that we are working at the moment on something where you can prove something without telling the person about the content in itself. Sounds very much today like zero knowledge proof. At that moment in time, I looked at them and said, you have to stop kind of drinking that stuff in the morning. It's not good for your health. Yeah. But what you kind of see is there is some stuff which kind of have the nucleus of what if we would do it this way, and unleashing the people not to worry about timesheets, reporting, justification, what you're doing, whatever, but just let them kind of push boundaries in their own means is so powerful. And it more or less accelerates systems, ecosystems, decentralized systems beyond what is imaginable, because they didn't come up and someone at IBM at the management level decided, and today we're going to more or less invent the hard drive. They didn't even know what they were kind of looking at. And that happened a lot of times. If you look at innovation and how innovation works and how things are getting pushed forward, would we have a mouse today without the guys at Xerox PARC? Don't know.
Actually,
Would we have a graphical user interface? I don't know. Did they get the contribution for that? Did they get the payback for that one? No, perhaps not, or perhaps they did. But at the end of the day, that was kind of changing things which we are using even today. Yeah. And you could now say blockchain technology is a technology element, and the usage of that one can go beyond imagination, but it needs people who are kind of able to spend their day on thinking about weird things where not everyone says, and what is the value what you're thinking about at the moment in time. Innovation has this element of failure and has the element of success. Yeah, 99 times you're wrong and 1 time you're right. The right time pays for the 99 times where you're wrong. And we have to kind of get into the thinking.
I think what makes a lot of sense is actually to say doing some research on already existing models. Like you said, for example, the IBM, they have something cool over there. Polkadot has something cool there. What else does exist? And what knowledge base can we establish already on some best lessons? Look already, okay, what worked, what didn't work? Might be in some cases easier, in some others not. Not sure on IBM, for example, I don't assume that they have a public documentation.
Of course, it's
Thing,
proprietary. No. But this is
exactly.
kind of like where we are at the brink of creating an ecosystem which goes onto another level to what we have experienced in the world. And it's driven by a tremendously powerful and interesting technology under the hood. Yeah. It doesn't fit for all cases, but there are probably a number of additional cases possible which we don't even dream about today. And in 10 years' time, we might look back and say, do you remember this meeting which we had after the town hall where we talked about shit? And look at where we are today.
And
Yeah.
our everybody in this call here, our mission is to make it till there.
Yeah,
right? So
exactly. Yeah.
No, much agree. This is a bunch of good stuff. And we are over an hour already, which is just, it's okay. That's good.
So
Right.
apologies from my side to Simon, Rob, and Ken, and the other ones who left already. I talked a lot. I hope it was not useless, or at least thought-provoking, either in disagreement or agreement. I think kind of following the thoughts, whether you disagree or agree, is actually pushing us forward. And if you bring it back, then we more or less kind of spend a great hour. That's at least my takeaway from my side.
For myself, I don't regret 1 minute of the session. I learned a lot of good stuff and a bunch of good perspective. And actually, on this also, I will start the documentation on the sessions. So each time, just taking some notes of, okay, some key outcomes, whatnot, and throw it on a GitHub just to have a public documentation. Where did the conversation started? Where did it went to? And cool. Nice. Thanks a lot, everybody. This was a hell of a nice session. Yep. And don't worry, Thorsten, you've been always quite good on. I had to bring you guys once back, you and Ken together, and it went too much over. but don't worry, don't shame for to speak up.
All good.
Awesome. And Simon, Ken, Rob, thanks a lot as well for being here, and the others who left already, and the ones watching this.
Thanks.
And I continue to, I think I do this just for a weekly base for some months now, ecosystem agent discussion in after town hall. because it's just so good to just start this conversation and listen to ideas already. And who knows where this might lead to. Cool.
It's good to talk about whatever.
And with this, we stop the recording.